Welcome to another episode of the Religion Law Podcast, where you learn about religious freedom and other religion law-related topics through a short question and answer format. I'm your host, Michael Fielding. Let's see how you do on today's quiz. Welcome to Religion Law Quiz number 101, numero ciento uno. Hopefully I'm getting my Espanol correct right there. I guess if I'm not, somebody might correct me. All right. Today is the last little segment where we're talking about the 2023 Groff v. Adeyeye decision from the Supreme Court, which was talking about Title VII and religious accommodations for employees. So we're going to keep it easy. True or false question today. True or false? An employer can satisfy Title VII's undue hardship test by assessing the reasonableness of a particular accommodation and determining that such a request is unreasonable and would create an undue hardship for the employer. What do you think? Can an employer satisfy this undue hardship test by assessing the reasonableness of a particular accommodation and then determining that such a request is unreasonable and would create an undue hardship for the employer? What do you think? True or false? Well, the Supreme Court says it's false. Title VII requires an employer to reasonably accommodate an employee's religious practice rather than just the employer assessing the reasonableness of the requested accommodation. Here's what the Supreme Court said. I'll have the specific citation in the show note. And the Supreme Court said, quote, as the Solicitor General authorities underscore, Title VII requires that an employer reasonably accommodate an employee's practice of religion, not merely that it assess the reasonableness of a particular accommodation or accommodations. The distinction matters. Faced with an accommodation request like Groff's, it would not be enough for an employer to conclude that forcing other employees to work overtime would constitute an undue hardship. Consideration of other options, such as voluntary shift swapping, would also be necessary, close quote. Now, we see here on the end of this quote a reference to what was going on here. As you'll recall, in Groff v. Adeyeye, you had an evangelical Christian worked for the Postal Service. Postal Service was saying, hey, we have this contract where we have to deliver items on Sunday, and guess what? You have to work. And the evangelical Christian is saying, hey, Sabbath day observance is super important to me. And I don't want to work on Sunday. Please give me an accommodation. And that was the big fight. It was more than a de minimis burden for the Postal Service, at least according to it. And the question went up and we get into the whole fight or discussion about, is this an undue hardship? That's what the whole Groff v. Adeyeye decision is about. And then what the Supreme Court is saying here is that Title VII requires that an employer reasonably accommodate an employee's practice of religion, not merely that it, i.e. the employer, assess the reasonableness of a particular possible accommodation or accommodations. And that's an important distinction. It sounds like a fine line, and you can get where the Supreme Court's going here. Because put yourself in the shoes of an employer, and this is just really human nature here, what I'm about to say. Anytime somebody comes to you and says, hey, do the, can I do this or do that? And let's assume that, you're the person running the show. And if you've ever had to manage several different people all at once, you know that can be a bit of a juggle at times. And it may be that you're juggling everything and you've got your system down and you think things are working just right. And then it's just life. Something always comes up. And so you're managing all these people and then suddenly somebody comes and says, hey, I need you to make an accommodation for me. And there's like this natural human knee-jerk reaction, which is, whoa, that's hard for me. I just got my little system working. Everything was working just fine. And now you're just coming in and asking for an accommodation and it's disrupting everything. And that's inconvenient to me. Well, yeah, it is. It is a little bit of a disruption to you. where you're managing it. But what the law is saying here is the simple fact that you may view that as a bit of a disruption. That's not going to be the litmus test. The question here is the law requires that the employer has to reasonably accommodate the employee's practice of religion unless it's going to be an undue burden for the employer. And the simple fact that it might be an inconvenience doesn't, and even if the employer views it as an inconvenience, doesn't mean that it is in fact going to be an undue burden for the employer. So, all right, again, I'm not an employment attorney. I don't profess to practice in the employment world. I just know that this Groff v. Adeyeye decision is a pretty important one when it comes to Title VII. And the whole point of these religion law quizzes is not to give legal advice. And that's what we have at the end of the outro as you listen to each episode. But the whole point of these quizzes is to provide education and then spur you, because you've learned something to further action. And if you think you have a legal issue, then you go talk to a labor and employment attorney, and they can give you proper guidance knowing the full parameters of the law. Again, we're just talking about some education here, just empowering, educating you so then you can move forward in a more educated manner as you confront the challenges of life. Okay, that's all I have for today. I will see you on the next Religion Law Quiz. Thank you for listening to today's episode. Remember, religion law quizzes are for educational purposes only and are not intended to be relied upon as legal advice. If you have found this episode to be helpful, please share it and leave a review. Until we meet again, keep being an influence for good.